In the Slavyansk direction, fighters from the Apache Battalion of Unmanned Systems used an FPV drone with fiber optic control to strike a Russian Molnian aircraft-type loitering munition. It's extremely difficult to shoot it down because of its aerodynamics and small size. There's also a high risk of the fiber optic cable breaking. Recently, the enemy has noticeably increased the use of this type of UAV when attempting to strike the rear positions and vehicles of the defense forces. And in the southern Slobozhansky direction, Pertuker from the Strix Strike Drone Company destroyed Russian camouflage locations used for preparing and launching Molnia-type drones. In addition, Ukrainian defenders eliminated an enemy UAV warehouse. Operators of unmanned systems forces continue to destroy enemy personnel in the Donetsk direction. SBS fighters surpassed 900 Russian army personnel eliminated in just a day and a half. The enemy tried to shoot back, disguise themselves, run away, and use vehicles, but it was all in vain. Pilots from the Phoenix unit of the State Border Guard Service eliminated not only personnel from the occupying Russian army, but also effectively struck the enemy's UAV command post.
Just this month, and it's not even over yet, the Kellas unit has already destroyed more than 1,000 Russians in a month. We could do even more, but for that, certain conditions need to be met, and we're working on those every day. If we're talking about all the defense forces, there's reason to believe that this month will be one of the most unprecedented in terms of the number of enemy personnel eliminated by our defense forces. The number of assaults we've managed to repel is also unprecedented, because without exaggeration, the spring offensive, the assaults and offensive actions everyone was talking about were, one way or another, neutralized by the defense forces. They destroyed the enemy's shock assault potential at that moment. The enemy was unable to carry out the necessary actions along the front lines of combat.
Meanwhile, in the Konstantinovka direction, the defense forces repelled attacks by the Russian army. This happened near the settlements of Plashchievka, Novopavlovka, Stepanovka, and Sofievka. In the Pokrovsk area, fighting took place near Rodinske, Hreshene, Udachne, Novonikolivka, and Molodetske. And on the Huliaipol section of the front, the Russians tried to push Ukrainian soldiers out of their positions near Bilohirya, as well as towards Starukrenka and Zeleznichna. The situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains tense. The enemy continues assault operations, trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses. During one of the attacks, the Russians advanced in small groups toward the positions of the 14th National Guard Brigade unit, but operators of strike drones from the 79th Brigade, 7th Air Assault Corps, quickly detected the enemy and began engaging the targets. Thanks to precise strikes, part of the enemy personnel was eliminated. As a result, the Russian offensive was thwarted even before they reached the Ukrainian positions. This month, Russian losses in the area of responsibility of the 79th Brigade amounted to 95 killed and 40 wounded. 2 armored vehicles, 8 guns, 1 MLRS, 145 UAVs, 39 antennas, and other Russian equipment were also destroyed. And in the village of Hershine, the Russian army is trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses with frontal assaults. The attacks are carried out daily, using infantry groups and occasionally light vehicles, ATVs, and motorcycles. Units in the area of responsibility of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces are holding certain lines and blocking the enemy's advance from the east toward the center of the village. Recently, the aggressor country has lost several positions in this settlement.
This specific point that we are looking at right now serves as a crucial and fundamental element within the broader context of the entire discussion we're having today. That is, even in its priority direction, the possibility of launching active offensive operations is limited. For them, that's Donetsk region, Dnipropetrovsk region, Zaporizhia region, and of course, Kharkiv region. They are losing the ability to conduct offensive operations. Where the enemy loses the ability to advance, we gain opportunities for active defense and the chance to tactically improve our positions.
And over the past day, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 870 Russian soldiers. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The total losses of the enemy since the start of the full-scale war have already exceeded 1,296,000 soldiers. Yesterday, the defense forces destroyed 4 Russian tanks, 4 armored vehicles, 48 artillery systems, and 1 multiple rocket launcher system. They burned 183 units of Russian vehicles and fuel trucks.
And now joining our broadcast is military expert Vladislav Seleznev. Vladislav, good morning. We are glad to welcome you live on Freedom TV channel. Glory to Ukraine.
Colleagues, I greet you and your esteemed audience. Thank you for the invitation. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
Glory to the heroes. Vladislav, let's try to figure out what's really happening right now on the various fronts. Of course, the Pokrovsk direction remains the hottest spot. But for example, according to representatives of the National Guard of Ukraine Brigade, Rubezh, the Russians have really worn down their units against the defense forces' positions, specifically in the Pokrovsk direction. According to your information, what's happening there right now?
The fighting continues. Yes, absolutely. This section of the front is getting a lot of media attention because the largest number of battles and clashes in a day are happening specifically in the Pokrovsk and Myrnohad areas. As paradoxical as it may sound, some of these settlements are still effectively under the control of the Ukrainian defense forces. Although, of course, the enemy continues its efforts to fully occupy these settlements. It's clear that the enemy's actions are aimed at taking full control of these settlements in order to establish a strike foothold from which they plan to advance from the south toward the urban agglomeration that unites Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkivka, and Kostiantynivka. So in this regard, the enemy's actions are absolutely logical. But what are the enemy's prospects? For a long time, they've been conducting active offensive operations, relying exclusively on infantry. Of course, infantry tends to wear down over time. Every morning, we see this in the reports from the Ukrainian General Staff. The scale of losses, killed and wounded Russian servicemen, is enormous. Basically, as of today, we can say that March will most likely set a record. In terms of the number of Russian servicemen killed and wounded, this was due not only to the fact that the enemy is actively using manpower during infantry or local assaults. First and foremost, it's also because the Ukrainian army has managed to adapt its operations by combining the effective actions of our artillery, our units, drone forces, and certain measures to strengthen our anti-tank and anti-personnel minefields. We succeeded. We managed to increase the number of recorded Russian losses. I believe this number will continue to grow because as the war becomes more and more high-tech, we are definitely leading the world when it comes to using drone systems. And every time they prove how effective they are. By the way, just a couple of numbers for you. If a year ago, colleagues, we were saying on air that about 90% of enemy losses, both in manpower and equipment, were the result of effective work by Ukrainian artillery units, now, about 60 to 70% are the result of combat operations by Ukrainian units using drone systems. As they say, the trend is obvious, and the technological process is definitely not standing still. It's moving forward, and it gives us the opportunity, by using this component, to increase the number of marked Russian losses.
Let's also discuss the situation that has developed in the Donetsk region. According to deep state data, this map shows certain, though minor, successes in the aggressor's occupation. At the same time, we understand that there is other news as well. Ukrainian forces drove Russian troops out of a fortified defensive line and liberated several settlements in the Oleksandrivka direction. This was reported by Artem Klep, commander of the drone systems company of the 95th Poltava Brigade. According to him, it was extremely difficult to push the enemy out of their positions because Russian troops had set up a powerful defensive line in advance with an extensive system of trenches, bunkers, and shelters. But despite this, they still managed to break through the fortifications. Please tell us, how has the Russians' tactics changed now, and can we say that they have focused their attention specifically on the Donetsk region, on the Donbass, which is so often mentioned in the Kremlin? In the so-called narratives and those information dumps they send out as signals to the whole world.
You are absolutely right. The Russians are waging hybrid aggression against sovereign Ukraine, and the informational component of this hybrid aggression plays a very, very significant role and occupies an important place. Therefore, I believe that paying special attention to statements from top Russian officials and top propagandists doesn't make sense. They certainly do not speak the truth in their claims. Often it's nonsense, and often it's deliberately false information. In this context, it's much more effective to craft our own informational messages and direct these very narratives specifically at the aggressor country. As for the actions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Alexandros direction, basically we heard the absolute numbers, which were announced by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Sursky. 470 square kilometers were liberated as part of certain counteroffensive operations and actions by the Ukrainian army. That's the total. We're talking about quite effective actions by the Ukrainian Defense Forces, who managed to restore a certain status quo and practically disrupt some of the enemy's plans. After all, if we look again at the deep state map, just a few weeks ago, things were quite clearly outlined there. The enemy's plans were to create a pincer movement for the operational semi-encirclement of our group defending Orikhiv, which is in the south of the Zaporizhzhia region. At present, all these plans and intentions of the enemy have basically been reduced to zero, and I believe that within the framework of the spring-summer offensive campaign, the enemy will try to regain control over the territories they so incompetently lost. But what do we need to understand here? The key factor influencing the situation on the battlefield is the factor of resources. Right now, it's impossible to make any long-term forecasts, for one simple reason. It's unknown where the enemy will direct some of the resources they freed up in the Pokrovsky and Marinrod areas. It's quite possible that the lion's share of the enemy's manpower, equipment, and weaponry will be directed toward attacks south of Kostiantynivka. Accordingly, it's also possible that the Alexandria direction could become somewhat secondary for the enemy. But again, let's recall the enemy's logic of action. The enemy acts in such a way that, after finding weak spots in the Ukrainian defense, they focus their pressure precisely on those sections of the front. That's why I believe this search for weak points in the Ukrainian defense will continue. And it's not right to ignore other sections of the front, whether it's the north of Kharkiv region or our Sumy region as well. The enemy will look for weak spots in order to strike us exactly where it will hurt us the most. So it's clear that in this context, we need to understand that both this spring and summer will be quite dynamic in terms of combat operations. Counting on a pause in hostilities as part of certain negotiation tracks is unrealistic. I wouldn't take that risk because it's obvious that the enemy's plans are still ambitious. The enemy does have some resources to carry out these plans, and accordingly, the Ukrainian army is operating within a framework of strategic defense. The goal is to deplete the Russian army's offensive capabilities as much as possible and to rid both Putin and his inner circle of any illusions that they can change the status quo on the battlefield by force of Russian arms.
Vladislav, let's really talk about these plans and which of them are likely or unlikely to come true. Well, look, one of the latest wishes the Russian occupiers had was to completely and entirely resolve the Donetsk issue. They wanted to do this by April 1st, meaning by tomorrow. And now we can see for sure that, once again, thank God, they have failed to achieve this. But here's what's interesting. Some time ago, they were actually redeploying their elite units from there to the south, right? In this time, they were already making plans for the southern directions, where the counteroffensive is being carried out quite successfully, and where, as Commander-in-Chief Syrski reported as of yesterday when he gave that interview, 480 square kilometers have already been liberated in the Alexandrovsk direction. And so, considering that their resources, especially in terms of manpower, are actually quite limited, Ukrainian defenders are wearing down the Russians more than the Russians managed to recruit in a month to put under their gun. And in fact, for 2026, as Commander-in-Chief Syrski himself noted, the Defense Forces are planning to conduct a strategic defensive operation, wearing down the enemy and depleting their forces and resources, creating the conditions for launching large-scale offensive operations. So regarding the plans and essentially the operations that both Ukrainian defenders and Russian occupiers are talking about, in your opinion, which of these can we actually expect to see in the near future or in the more distant perspective, depending on the situation?
The war has changed dramatically. We need to understand that it has essentially shifted into a trench warfare phase, like in World War I. Moving on the battlefield has become more difficult. This applies both to accordingly to Russian occupiers. Why then? It's a kill zone. The absolute dominance of drone systems in the air makes it impossible to secretly prepare and concentrate the necessary forces and resources at those lines, those positions that become priorities in the final stages of planning offensive operations. Yes, of course. By the third decade of April, the situation will change somewhat. The greenery will appear, the ground will stabilize, and as a result, both we and the enemy will be able to use wheeled and tracked vehicles on a larger scale. But for now, I believe that over the next couple of weeks, maybe 3, there will be this kind of back and forth on the battlefield without any major changes. Next, I believe that still progress is possible for the side that will have air superiority. That is, the drone system, not just for reconnaissance, but also for strikes, is mostly what inflicts the greatest damage on the enemy side. Should we consider the likelihood of the enemy actively using armored vehicles? Yes, the enemy does try to do this from time to time, but any armored vehicle, no matter how well it's protected from electronic warfare systems, is basically doomed. If not by one, then by a dozen drones. It will inevitably turn into a pile of burnt, twisted scrap metal. And that means that most likely we will still see attempts by the enemy to infiltrate their forces and assets through the battle lines of the Ukrainian army deep into our defenses. The enemy has repeatedly taken advantage of their numerical superiority, but as we can see, we have already found ways, opportunities, and resources to eliminate these threats. The search and raid operations in the Alexandros direction, during which we liberated about 470 square kilometers, are a vivid confirmation of this. But in any case, we must understand that the key factor determining the dynamics, scale, and intensity of combat operations is the factor of resources. Right here and now, the Ukrainian army is working to completely deprive the enemy in the near operational zone of the ability to safely provide logistics for its forward assault units. Pay attention to the numerous statements from bloggers. They're practically howling because Ukrainian drones are starting to howl deeper behind the lines. 20, 50, 80, and even 100 kilometers deep, literally burning up all the vehicles involved in these logistics operations. And that means we've gained the resources, the capabilities, and have created the conditions to make this process possible. I believe that the current enemy offensive, which in my opinion started somewhat prematurely, this process started in the second half of March. This is because the enemy is in a hurry, since they understand that in the next month or month and a half, we will seriously thin out the ranks of Russian military logistics. Accordingly, they're rushing to achieve at least some results on the battlefield.
Let's discuss the strikes that
Are hitting the Russian Federation itself. Ukraine's defense forces are not only repelling attacks at the front, but also striking deep inside Russia. The goal is to reduce the enemy's financial and logistical capabilities. For example, SBU drones have hit the Ust-Luga oil terminal more than once this week. Long-range drones from the Alpha Special Operations Center successfully targeted infrastructure in the Leningrad region. The attack resulted in significant damage and a fire. This is Russia's key seaport on the Baltic Sea. It is used for oil exports, including with the use of shadow fleet vessels. Let me remind you that the SBU has already successfully struck Russia's oil infrastructure in the Baltic Sea 4 times over the past week. And if I'm not mistaken, it looks like 4 isn't the final count yet, as of today. So how is this already affecting the occupiers' army?
I believe that the resource factor is of primary importance here as well. The Russian economy is kind of perked up. Amid the rather complicated developments taking place in the Persian Gulf, the Russian economy has gotten a chance. Literally out of nowhere, it was able to make huge amounts of money by selling oil, petroleum products, and other related goods. These are what fill the Russian budget, and first and foremost, the military budget. But then the sanctions named after General Vasil Maluk came into play, and as you mentioned, there were 4 attacks on the port infrastructure of Ust-Luga. Before that, there were strikes on the port of Primorsk, also in the Baltic Sea area. Even earlier, the infrastructure of oil terminals in Novorossiysk was partially destroyed, as well as in populated areas located in the same region of the Russian Federation. So this is happening here and now. Ukrainian army is sport of This type of strike is part of a program to deplete the economic potential of the Russian army. And this is undoubtedly a very important aspect, because in this way, we are dispelling any illusions for Putin and his inner circle that he is still capable of carrying out large-scale offensive operations. I still believe that, most likely, the Russian army, de facto, only has enough resources left for large-scale combat operations through the spring and summer. After that, we will see stagnation, because resources inevitably get depleted. Russia doesn't have many stable sources to replenish these resources. The sanctions policy is working. Moreover, I think we should pay attention not so much to the sanctions imposed by the United States government, but rather to the British and European sanctions. They're more effective and more painful for the Russian economy. And in any case, we need to understand that the operations currently being carried out by the Ukrainian army are systematic, methodical, and aimed at destroying not only economic, but also military potential. And notice how clear the logic of the Ukrainian army's actions is. First, we destroyed the enemy's radar surveillance systems and air defense systems. It might seem like it would be better to destroy the enemy's air defense missile launchers, but that's not the case. Our soldiers acted absolutely logically, literally depriving the Russians of the ability to fully and effectively control the airspace. After that, we managed to create the necessary gaps in the Russian air defense system, and through these gaps, both our trusty Ukrainian missiles and trusty drones tried to fly in, doing that very important work of destroying Russia's military and economic potential.